Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome back to the Frequency Labyrinth. I have a treat for you today. You know how I love to have conversations with people I know, and today we're having a conversation with Dana Overcash. And I'm super excited about this because Dana is a human design expert, and she is also one of those rare projectors. So this is going to be exciting. Dana, I always say this on the podcast when I'm having conversations with people. I should get a bio. I never do because brain. So I'm going to have you introduce yourself. So you get to celebrate yourself in your introduction.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast. I am a 2-4 emotional projector on the right angle cross of planning, if that means anything to the listeners. I have the 16 and line 2 and my son, and I work part time as a therapist. I do human design readings as well, and I could say a whole lot more, but I'll stop there.
Okay, so how were you introduced to human design? That's the obvious question, right?
So in early 2020, I saw a Facebook post by a mutual friend who I'd never met. I don't know about you, but there's a lot of people that I'm friends with on Facebook that I just know through someone else. It was Jess Bubico, if you've heard of her. She is a manifester, and she had been studying human design and put out a video, and it was, join this class. And I saw it and I was intrigued, and I didn't think much more about it. And later that night, I went to bed. I had a dream that night that I wrote her a check for the cost of the class, which to me at the time was not a small amount of money. It's not a small amount of money to me now, over 6 years later. And I woke up and I'm like, that's really weird. I'm not doing that. And needless to say, I ended up joining her class to feel madly in love with the human design system. And yeah, I mean, as a manifester, she really initiated me on this path.
That's interesting. I got introduced because I was in a mastermind with Chitan Parkland, and he was running charts, and I got my chart and I looked at it and I was like, that's interesting. And then I totally laid it down. And it was always in the back of my mind, but it was one of those, I just wasn't in the right space. And I think a lot of people look at it and go, that's intriguing, and then lay it down. And also, I think this is important. Chitan was not going to be my teacher, because I just didn't resonate with his style. And then a couple of years later, when I started seeing others that came from corporate background like I did, and I was like, oh, okay, let me look at this again. And then I was like, okay, all right, and going down that path. So I think it's interesting how different people enter in the thing. And then you are well versed in gene keys. And I didn't find gene keys until several years later. But I think gene keys is what really drew me deeper in that route.
Yes. I also was briefly introduced to Gene Keys in her program, and I bought the book and I dabbled a little bit. And I kind of like you, when you first saw your chart, I was like, this is really interesting, but it feels like a lot. And I was also, deeply immersed in human design. So I didn't get serious about Gene Keys for probably a few more years. I mean, I did do a couple online retreats, and to me, they're so inseparable now. I mean, they're just two halves of a whole in my in my mind, just very complementary. And I get something from human design that I don't get from Gene Keys, and vice versa. I mean, it's just sort of like I have a lot of logical circuitry in my human design chart. And so I loved sort of the attack on human design and learning the gates and learning what the profiles mean and the types and all the things. And then, the Gene Keys world is a little bit more challenging for me because it's more mystical and personal, and it's more of an inner exploration that I don't necessarily need to externalize, that my fourth mind likes to do. So
That's interesting because I've got a Pisces stellium in the ninth house, so I'm all about the mystical and so that's probably the reason why I was so drawn in that way, is because I love the whole concept of the shadow and the gift. I'm done the retreats with virtual retreats with Richard, so I like the way he has a poetic way of looking at things, right? Really he's beautiful with the language. And I like this concept of operating the shadow or the gift because I think that is we talk about a lot of in the personal and spiritual development industry, we talk about being out of alignment. And I'm challenged with that word because I think that we're probably always in alignment in a way, but we're either operating in the shadow or the gift. But on my shamanic side, I go, okay, well, if you've got profound soul loss or power loss, then that is going to feel like out of alignment. So I've got this really complicated relationship with that word. How do you feel about that when you're talking to someone as it relates to like deconditioning and talking to them about their conditioning within their design?
Yeah, so I tend to use more of the human design lens for that in terms of open centers. I've been sort of deeply steeped in, this is one of the major ways that we get conditioned. And there are other ways. Obviously we're impacted by our holding environments and our parents' designs and all the things. And also, I have to hold in perspective that the chart doesn't explain everything. I've seen people show up with I try to prepare as much as I can, my gate 48, what over prepares before I meet someone in person. And sometimes what they're struggling with just cannot be addressed and can't be explained by the chart. And, I have the two Jinky 2 in my gate 2 in my Mercury and my unconscious Saturn. And what I realize is sometimes the most basic thing that people need is to be received with no agenda and to be heard and to feel validated and be witnessed. And as much as I love learning these systems that help me understand not only myself, my loved ones, my clients better, I've studied everything from the Enneagram to Gene Keys to human design. In college, it was the Myers-Briggs,
Right.
love languages. I love systems, that help me understand myself and others better. And sometimes all that complexity is not what the person in front of me needs at that moment. And I do have need motivation for those that are familiar with the variables. And so it does require some versatility, with that 16, because sometimes people don't need me to throw a lot of complexity at them or talk about their Saturn gate. And sometimes what they're struggling with just can't be, there's not an access point through the chart. It's just more just that heart to heart connection.
That is so, so true. And especially for a beginner, when you give them too much information, it's overwhelming and they won't do anything with it. When I talk to a person that's brand new to human design, I usually stick to the biggest thing is how do you make decisions and how do you manage your energy for me? What do you start with? Do you go with the same thing or do you take a different angle?
Yeah, it's funny. I did the readings like I was taught to do them for a long time, and you learn the rules before you break the rules. And what feels comfortable for me right now and where I am, and it's always, a learning process. I like to start out with the things I see in the chart because I think in that initial conversation, and I have, questions that they answer in advance and kind of let me know what they're struggling with. Because obviously I can prepare all day long for a reading and show up to talk about, oh, you're in your Saturn return and that not be relevant.
Right.
I want to make sure that the time is relevant.
What are like something that they can actually go and use immediately so that it sort of, oh, I had a reading. That was cool. Let me go and do X, right? When I give something, I want something that they can actually take and practically use in their life. I mean, that's one of the reasons why my tagline is practical integration.
Yeah. So I like to talk about the things I see in the chart because I find that if they feel seen, because a lot of times people show up in front of me and they don't know anything about human design. I expect them to. But what I've found is if they feel seen in that first, part of the session, then they're listening a little more to because, the tight part, the strategy, the authority, the meat and potatoes. Yeah. I mean, that is the practical application.
Right.
So I hope that they take away from that, how they best make decisions. That I always begin with, look, I'm going to talk about things I see in your chart, but the whole purpose of this system is to empower you to take back, your inner sovereignty, to know yourself, to know what feels right in your body. So that's really, the thing that I hope they take away most is, me included, but so many of us have been taught to, give our power away and to trust the experts and to trust the authorities. And, we've been deeply steeped in that. And so the biggest takeaway, I think, is igniting that spark within them that like they really have the power. My pearl in my culture, which is Jupiter and human design, is in 34. So I hope to empower them to make decisions that feel right for them, to know, sort of their role in the world and their strategy and how they make decisions that are aligned so that they're not, relying on the external world to tell them who to be and how to be and what not to be and all the things, because that's what causes this occurring, right? And at least for me, that's been when I've gotten away from who I am in my essence, my core.
Absolutely. So you talked about you have to know the rules to break the rules. And I believe that wholeheartedly in a lot of systems. I believe that in human design. I believe that in astrology. And I believe that in my shamanic practice as well. What do you think your 3 top rule breaking hot takes are on human design? And Jinkies, if you want to throw that in.
I think that there's a lot of confusion with projectors, and I see, like, I'm a part of a lot of different Facebook groups and forums. I think that sometimes the waiting for an invitation for projectors gets misinterpreted. I mean, I wholeheartedly believe that, like, if recognition is not like, you invited me to do this interview, right? Like, I know you from another group that we're a part of, and I feel recognized by you, right? And so, as a projector, really feeling into, does the invitation feel aligned? I think that there is a misconception often that projectors are supposed to just sit around like flowers waiting to be picked, and that life is meant to be passive and like, oh, I just hope someone notices me. And I definitely follow other teachers who don't subscribe to that. But I think sometimes early on, when projectors learn about, what it means to be a projector, and I probably had some confusion around that too, that we're not supposed to initiate anything. We're not supposed to, have any impetus to follow an inspiration. And yeah, I think that gets muddy for people. But in terms of the big invitations, and, I fully subscribe to, the recognition, being there, the invitation feeling aligned. But yeah, I think that, projectors are here to follow their inspirations, their curiosities, what feels right, and that it's not as passive as it sometimes espouses to be.
Yeah. I think one of the other things it's a slight rule depending on if you're a purist or not. That I know that you work with that the original system does not is Chiron. And I think we both feel pretty strongly that, like, why would you not work with Chiron in your human design chart? But I know that I know several purists out there that's not even listed on the chart for them. So, what are your thoughts about our dear friend Chiron?
Oh, having gone through my Chiron return already, those things got very loud for me. I have 21 in line 4 in my Chiron, and those things were very alive for me at the end of my 40s. I'm 54 now, almost 55. So it is always a part of, when I run a chart, I always look at the Chiron themes, even for a 20-year-old, right? Even if, Chiron return is decades away, I think it's very relevant. And I guess coming to know me and what is relevant for me, I'm going to bring that to my sessions. If there's, something that I've been taught that's not personally relevant, it's really hard for me to be excited about it or to see the value in it if I haven't personally found value. And understanding my Chiron wounds, I mean, I have the 17, that's your sun gate, 17 in line 6 of my unconscious Chiron, which has been a tougher nut to crack. But those themes are very much alive for me and were even in younger years. So I think it's remiss to not bring that into the picture.
I agree. I think it's such a powerful placement and also in an astrology chart, bringing it in also from there too, because it just sort of frames up the challenge that people are going to look everything through. And that's why whenever I hear someone's like, well, we don't use Chiron, I'm like, I'm sorry for you. Because I think you're missing a big opportunity.
Right. Yeah.
right? So give me one more third little rule breaker, you think?
Well, I feel a little uncomfortable with the idea that there's something that happens at the end of 7 years, in terms of the 7-year deconditioning. And while I agree that it takes time, right? Our becoming, our remembering who we are, the self exploration that, human design, gene keys, those systems bring. And I say this fully owning that, like, I've been with this system for a little over 6 years. So, maybe ask me after 7 years, maybe I'm going to turn into a princess. I don't know. But I suspect that, just like my younger self thought, I'm going to just like arrive one day. I'm going to arrive fully whole and
Right.
healed, and life's going to be easy. And I'm going to look back, sort of like the hero's journey that we're all kind of pitched. I come to believe in my lived experience that we're always becoming, and there's always deeper levels of healing. And so, yeah, I don't know that there's any, I don't think I'm subscribed to the theory that there's anything magical about 7 years, and then I'm probably still going to be deconditioning in 10 years and in 15 years. And, there's that, falling asleep and waking up, or even in my dreams, I have things that come up that are still like deeper layers of things that I have been healing and quote unquote working on for years. So
I
that would be
I believe, like, I think we're like-minded there. I also think it depends on where you were in your healing journey when you got introduced to the system, and where your awareness level was, where you were in your life cycle season, where you were, what astrological transits you were going through. Like, there's so many different factors, I feel like, that factor into that. I think some people it'll take more time. I think some people it'll take less time to get to whatever place that Rob was talking about when he talked about the 7 years. I kinda wonder if it was more along the lines of you need to commit because this is a long haul thing. This is not like an instantaneous thing, because we love instant gratification, and we're all about the silver bullet type of solution as a collective for the most part, especially in the Western world. But I do think that there's so many different things that can factor into that. I would say, like, I've definitely been experimenting with human design more than the 7 years, but probably not to, like, the full dedication of the 7 years. I think I got introduced to this in, yeah, it was 2013, but it took me a couple of years to get, "Okay, I really need to pay attention to X, Y, and Z and commit." My pearl is the shadow of it is half-heartedness, and the pearl gift is commitment. Go figure. But I do think there is something to stage of life and whatnot, because I think that, like, if you're prior to your Chiron return and you think you got it down, come on. That's gonna teach you a lesson when it comes around. Well, I just started my second Saturn return, so yeah, at least I'm going in this time going, "I'm gonna learn some stuff. I'm not gonna I don't even know what I'm gonna learn, but I know that I need to, like, just lean into it and go with the flow."
yeah. I think it does help to have some context around that,
Yeah.
especially if you're going through some stuff to okay, this is a transit, this is a life cycle. This is, some of what I'm feeling is normal. I may need some extra support during this time. I know that has immensely helped me, when I've been, like, understanding my Chiron return. But I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying that, context, and there's so many variables.
There's so many.
It's known as the science of differentiation.
Exactly.
We're more than our formulas. Like you said, there's a depth and there's a time and um, maturity. There's just a lot at play, and it's not. We're way more than the patterns that are revealed in our profiles and our charts. The human experience is way more nuanced than that. I've certainly met people in their 20s that had a lot of depth and maturity that blew me away. And I've met people, older than me that, like, it's again, we're all different.
One of the first centers that I look at is the splenic center, especially if I have someone coming to me. I have a form as well. They talk a lot about fear and anxiety, and I look at the splenic center as some insight into that. So it is one of my favorite centers to zero in on. Do you have any that pull to you a little bit more than others?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, I think the spleen, I'm with you in agreement on that. The spleen can tell a lot about, what are those underlying fears that keep people stuck. I know for me personally, I have the 48, which gets to my 16. I have that whole channel. And so, and that fear of inadequacy has definitely been alive. It's been part of my experience. Just, I mean, it's been with me for so long, right? The emotional solar plexus would be one that
Mhm.
I instantly go to, especially like looking to see, like, is that open? Is it defined? If it's defined, what is the quality of their emotional wave? Is it individual? Is it tribal or collective? I think a lot of people feel validated when they hear with an open emotional solar plexus that they're empathic and that they're picking up on other people's feelings and might think that they're theirs or emotional energy. I think that that is validating for a lot of folks. Of course, I look at the sacral as an open sacral being.
Right.
My eye goes there very quickly, and there are a lot of readings that I do for generators. Um, but yeah, open sacral folks. I mean, to know that you're not a generator, and it's just like that awareness of because I know for me it was huge. Just
Yeah.
learn what that meant, and also the recognition piece. Why some people could sort of see my wisdom and value. And then other people, I just felt very invisible and irrelevant around. And it's very confusing and hard to make sense of. But also, someone who's deeply sensitive, I internalized all of that. So that went way beyond your question, but those are
No,
definitely.
I'm curious, was the having the open sacral, was that like the big, like, when we talk about looking at charts and you look at something and go, and you see something and go, wow, okay. You had that big exhale of, I'm not crazy. I thought, I'm not crazy. But it's the validation of something that you internally knew at some level, but maybe didn't have words for. Was it, if you had to pick 1 or 2, when you went through your chart, what hit you? Was it the sacral or was it something else?
The sacral, and I will say I am an unusual projector in that I have 8 centers defined.
Mm, okay.
That open sacral is a huge lesson for me.
Oh, sure. I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, so it's unusual, like, most projectors I see have a lot more openness in their charts, but yes, that the open sacral because before I found human design, I studied Enneagram for years,
Okay.
and I was, determined to bring that out. I worked in the school system as a school counselor for about 25 years, and I couldn't understand, why some people saw the value in it and were really excited, and then I was meeting with a lot of resistance from other people. And ultimately, when I found human design, I realized because I was doing it the way I was coached, which was you got to get out there and sell, and you got to knock on doors, and you got to convince people this has value, and that is not the projector strategy. And yet, when I was invited, like I was invited to speak about the Enneagram at a charter school, like they just couldn't get enough. I thought, what is? I don't understand. It was very confusing to me, and that was a big dawning, when I realized, the projector strategy. And when I was invited, it was received. There was an opening. It was easy. It was energizing. I was passionate. I was, all the things. And then when I was trying to push out, because that was kind of how I was being coached at the time by someone who knew nothing about human design, I was met, people were just more interested.
Right.
Um, and if I needed further proof, I remember when I first started studying human design, I went to a friend that I respect, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to please let me do a reading for you." And, she was like, "Okay." And I walked away from that reading. I was like, wow, that wasn't very fun. Like there was no juice in that for me. But I was initiating, right? And so, it was sort of, me early, bumping around and experimenting, so to speak. And it just such a completely different experience and sharing my passion and sharing what I've studied. As projectors, we love to study systems, and we love to share as a 2/4, especially. I love to share what I've studied and to be called out for what I've studied. But when I initiate the conversation, it's like a lead balloon. I mean, it just drops. And so I've had to learn to, I put myself out there in the ways that feel comfortable for a second line hermit. And I wait for people to approach me. And that works for me. And that's what kind of turns me on, and when I know that there's genuine interest and there's engagement and sessions are collaborative and energizing and stimulating. And like I'm just buzzing sometimes when I get out of reading.
I'm curious because I know a couple of projectors that are entrepreneurs and they struggle with the hustle mentality of sales. And it really is a go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated type of situation there. If you had a couple of insights for people that are projectors that own businesses that are getting into this, okay, but I've got to sell because sales are the only thing that move the needle on, like, what insight do you have for those guys out there?
That is a great question. And I will just give a little disclaimer that I do not have a booming business with, my phone constantly ringing off the hook. So I'm probably not, if you're trying to grow your business, I'm probably not the example to follow. But what comes
Okay,
to mind.
projectors, this is one of those, like, she doesn't even know her brilliance. She she's about to drop some bombs and she doesn't even realize how good they are.
So
Proceed.
thank you very much. So what comes up for me when you ask that question, because I think a lot of projectors and people, entrepreneurs in general, struggle to promote themselves. If you can outsource that, if you can get someone else to promote you, that's what comes up for me because it's highly uncomfortable for me, and I have not hired anyone to do that. Just full disclosure. But I also lean into know what your areas of strength are and know what your things that you're not great at. When I retired from education as a school counselor, my intention was to grow my business. And I did not realize all the behind the scenes stuff that went into that. And I'm just not inspired to do that behind the scenes stuff. I mean, yes, I have a website. I do the basics in terms of like people can book with me and make payment and all the things. And those things are important to building a business.
I think that projectors' superpower in entrepreneurship that's overlooked is referrals. It just seems when I have a conversation with them, that's like, oh, it's like, yeah, well, so and so. And I'm like, you need to lean more into that. These people have already invited you into their lives. You just need them to go and be spokespeople for you, like you just said. It's not just I hire someone, it's your network is the people that you have touched are a representation of the work that you do out there. And I also think it's really hard to get them to rest. So, what would you say about rest?
Reps for projectors.
Yeah.
Yes. It's really probably the hinge on which your success will swing. It's that important. And full disclosure, I don't really rest well a lot of the time. Like it's a challenge for me to remember that and to not push through. I have a defined will center. I can push through, but there is a rhythm that is a sweet spot for me, in terms of balancing the being and doing and, very much relevant to my 3740 and my radiance and purpose, also known as the unconscious sun and earth. When I'm exhausted, and that's the shadow of my 40 and purpose, it's not sustainable for me. It's also not best for the people that I really want to show up for, whether that's in my personal life or people in my professional life. And so there's a constant monitoring of that and dialogue and that whole projector thing of not knowing when enough is enough. I still fall in that hole, like all these years in, I still fall in that hole. And I know when I'm there, and usually I just need unscheduled time alone. So it's really critical to me being the best version of me, which is who I'm here to be. That's what makes life better for me, but it also helps me to serve my purpose and
Exactly.
love on the people that I want to love on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, in the human design world, we hear a lot about the 2027, I'm going to use air quotes here for audio, prophecy. I hate that word because I think that there's a lot of weight that is attached to it in our society. I think of it more as a shift. And I think that one of the things that some of the analysts out there that were traditionally trained are missing a little bit of context around what I think astrology brings in, which is we've had all of these outer planets shift this year, last year, that's sort of leading up to this shift. And outer planets in astrology shift things for the collective. And that will have a ripple effect. So I'm curious to your thoughts on the 2027 shift.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think what I pay most attention to are the relationships that I have, in my network, right? My personal relationships, my professional relationships, and what I see in terms of just distilling an answer, I see a lot of people struggling. I see a lot of shadow stuff coming to the surface that feels very destabilizing, a lot of purging, for lack of a better word. I see a lot of people waking up to not being able to trust the systems and the structures that have made us, me included, that have made me feel secure, have made us feel a sense of security and safety walking through the world. And I think ultimately the shift is an inner shift and it's a reclamation of our power and getting into right relationship with our power and learn, basically learning to take more responsibility for everything, which is a sobering thing. And I know we talk a lot about, we create our own reality. We hear that a lot. And I think that there is experientially, and there's an embodiment of that knowing that's happening, a waking up. It's been like, even for me, like it's been a mental concept that we've heard forever, right? But there's just, I think, a lot of cellular shifts. Richard Rudd talks a lot about that. And ultimately, the biggest shift is us taking back responsibility, taking back inner sovereignty, not relying on external sources of authority or structures or systems to tell us who we are. So that, I don't know that that fully answers your question.
I think that's a very practical way of looking at the shift. I think it's okay, I can use these systems, and there are many systems out there that you can utilize to reclaim personal sovereignty, to take more responsibility. And not all systems work for all people, right? That's why you have to find your own way with what works for you and what you resonate with, the teachers that you resonate with. Human design was a really good example for me. I got introduced to the system. I didn't resonate with the person as a teacher for me for the system, but I did find a teacher that I resonated with, right? I firmly believe that everybody's purpose on earth is the same. I think we come here for the evolution of our soul and to contribute back to the collective in some sort of way. That's a positive, meaningful way. Now, what that looks like for a person is depends on your gifts and your challenges and all of that. I think that this move away from maybe the remnants of the Industrial Revolution where we were like sort of making factory workers of everybody marching and doing the same thing. I think we're shifting from that to let's get a more creative expression of ourselves and more innovation, more accepting of different way of doing things. When I'm feeling down on humanity, I go back and I look at NASA videos, particularly the one that they did for the 50 years of space exploration. When we have individual curiosity that comes together collectively to go do this like marvelous thing, and then everybody comes together and nobody cares about all the mundane bullshit in the day-to-day lives. It's like, oh my gosh, we did this beautiful thing. There's something bigger than ourselves, right? But also we're not lost in it because we know we participated in that as well. Like it's this nice mashup.
And participating honestly, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Different choices.
yeah.
Because someone with a lot of tribal circuitry, I have the 3740 as well as the 1949. channels, there's participating and bringing yourself to a system or community and not fully embodying your individuality,
Right.
having to leave behind parts of you because, oh, that's not acceptable here or that's not what's expected. Um, so I think more it boils down to more honest choices. And I meet a lot of people, especially women in midlife, who don't know who they are. I was one of them. I
Right.
was one of them. I just did what I thought I was supposed to do. And then, eventually you kind of wake up to, why don't I feel better? Why do I feel sad? Or why is this not fulfilling? And so I think that there's just a lot of, yeah, we have to know who we are. We have our choices, being more aligned is about being honest with ourselves and also getting some of the residue and conditioning out of the way that
Yeah.
off our path.
And human design and gene keys are a good blueprint for that. They're like, okay, let's take some of the guesswork out and see if this resonates with you. Let's dig a little deeper here. What placement was the hardest for you think? You look at it and go, that is not me. And then you think about it and you're like, that is so me.
What placement was the hardest? Meaning like what gate or key?
Just what do you think was the hardest thing? Could be a gate, could be a key, could be a channel.
You Wow, that is a good question. I don't have anything coming up other than, sometimes when in terms of Richard Brett's work, who I agree with you, he's brilliant. There definitely have been things that, definitely been keys I've explored that I had to really sit with, because when I first read them, I was like, that doesn't sound like me at all. It's probably, the ones that are more unconscious that I've had to kind of sit with more, like my unconscious Chiron, the 17. Like I said, I still feel like I don't fully comprehend, and that's your sun gate. So maybe
Yep.
that's your conversation. I still I feel like I still don't fully see how that energy shows up in my life, other than there's a lot of comparison, that keeps me in feeling inadequate and, my 48 and the shadow. That one has been tough for me, but I'd say the other channels, I mean, I have the like I said, the 2 tribal channels. I have 2 collective channels, the 1648. I guess the 48 has been a big challenge now that I'm talking through this, which is what projectors do, right? That in terms of
And what is the 48 again? Because I don't know the
the 48 in Gene Keys world moves from the shadow of inadequacy,
okay,
the gift of resourcefulness,
typicalness.
and the activity of wisdom.
Yeah.
So as I said, it connects to the 16 in my throat, and the 16 on the throat in my sun. And when I did the star pearl, that was consistently, there's self-assessments that you do. That was consistently the lowest. And that is my creativity. I have it in Uranus in both conscious and unconscious. So the 48 seems to ask me to let go of all the knowledge and just trust, and trust I'll know what I need to know when I know it. That's really hard for me.
Yeah.
Really hard for me. I mean, I see the gift of embodied wisdom. I heard something and it could have been Richard. It could have been someone else that knowledge lives in the mind, wisdom lives in the body.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
and that 48 is very intuitive, and I often have not thought of myself as intuitive, even though I have the 6124 channel as well, and that's kind of intuitive. But I have these moments with clients where I'll give an example, like I'll give this, like there are other ways to receive, talking about the two and receivership and asking for help and the things, and I'll give an example, and it'll just be something I feel like I pulled from the ethers, and they'll say that happened to me last week. So I see it. I've had enough evidence to see there's some intuition that comes into. I had a client where I said, like, if your shoulder is hurting, and she's like, "How did you know my shoulder was hurting?" And I'm like, "I didn't." So that the 48 is definitely been. I mean, I love the sort of the quintessence of it, or at least what I arrived at was that sense of inadequacy that I feel is never going to be quelled or muted by something outside of me. And I've spent so much of my adult life looking for validation, the quote unquote answers.
Right.
Just give me the answers to the test. I want to get the most mileage per galaxy while I'm here. And let's just cut to the chase here and just, looking outside of myself for that sense of enoughness. And when it dawned on me sitting with that key, and it was a lot of sitting with that key, that there's nothing outside of me that's going to feel that. And there was also a plant medicine experience that brought that on too. So, I have to give that some credit. It was like, oh, okay. So now what? But understanding too, having a moment where I felt my worth for the first time in a way that I'd never felt it before, and realizing that that this is inside of me. It didn't come outside of me, which means nobody can take it away.
I also think that ties into the 17th, though. That is the gift of omniscience. Tapping into that is that. For me, I had that moment when I was doing energy work on my stepfather when he transitioned. There was a couple of moments in there where I felt the interconnectedness of everything. And I think that when you get that moment that you're talking about where you're like, oh, I had that experience of nothing outside, I feel like that is the interconnectedness of everything. Because there's this level of trust and wisdom that comes through in that experience that you can't even put words around, but there's something in your soul that just freaking knows.
Yeah.
And nobody can convince you any other way. I think that that's where the 17 came through for you.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
And
because that really ties into the two of those working together, which, I mean, that's the other thing is I think that sometimes we think about these gates as being separate, and they're not. Like, there's these interconnectedness things that happen. They're like, "Oh, okay, well, this is the pulling of 2 or 3 afterward." What is one of the things that you wish people would stop saying in the human design community?
hmm, I can't do that because I'm a projector.
I
Or I can't do that because in my chart it says blah, 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 and
Using the chart as an excuse.
yeah, because that's not what it's intended for.
Is there something that you wish practitioners that are teaching people human design would stop doing?
I think we have to just remember, kind of going back to what I said earlier, that people are nuanced. And if I see something in a chart, and I always invite people at the beginning of the session, like if I'm going to be talking about themes I see, if it doesn't resonate, feel free to say, I don't relate to that.
Yep.
And just making sure that the client is always the expert and that I am just reflecting back potentials and themes. And sometimes I project, sometimes, as a projector, I get it wrong. I assume a value that I hold that they may not, and I mean, that's a human thing. But I think just, remembering that the client really is the expert and not getting too hung up on not being too rigid with interpreting the chart or, well, that can't be right because right here it said, there's this aspect in your chart that tells me that's not true. I mean, I think we have to be honoring and really, again, reinforce that they are their own inner authority. And I'm just a mirror reflecting back possibilities and potentials that you're smiling. Tell me about your smile.
No, I think that's absolutely true. That it's all about the person developing self-trust and authority for themselves. It has nothing to do with us. We're just providing an opportunity for insight.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I close out the podcast, I always say, remember to find beauty every day and seek the magic in the mundane. So I'm going to ask you how you do that.
That's a great question. And I do not have the 20 defined, but it is a huge one. It's a huge lesson for me because I have that 34 on an open sacral 4 times. So being present because I can be like 3 years in the future or be thinking about dinner or tomorrow. I do challenge myself to be present. And I have a husband who is a 3420 manifesting generator who has the 20 in his purpose sphere. And he reminds me, I appreciate him reminding me often, and it can just be a look, that just like stops time across a crowded room when we're with family or in a gathering. He has a Pisces stellium like you do. His is in the 12th house. So he writes in the morning and just the most beautiful, heartfelt things you've ever read. I think he is a great teacher for me. He's also a 3-5 like you. He's a great teacher for me to pause because that 34 on an open sacral, I can be really busy and just rushing to the next thing. Richard Rudd is also a big teacher of the pause, right? Where I have these, teachers in my life that remind me life is not a race. Life is not my to-do list because I can get very focused on what needs to get done and just lose joy. lose the quality of this life, of what I'm here for. So I would say that I need constant reminders to just deepen in the moment. One of my favorite expressions, and I do not remember where I got this, but it was something along the lines of, can I lean into the enoughness of this moment? And so
That's good.
I come back to that a lot. Um, because, that's been a big lesson for me, just feeling my enoughness, owning my enoughness, knowing that I don't have to perform for love. Like there are a lot of things I do in my life that, that I am quote unquote, there's a performance involved and there's a contract and, I've got big in the 3740, but I also need lots of downtime and space to just be and not be performing and just to be fully present to like, how am I feeling in my body? What does my body need right now? Oh, look, there's a dogwood. I stopped on my run yesterday and took a picture of the dogwood flowers. Literally those moments that just remind me of the beauty that I get to live around and the beautiful people that influence me and that remind me to take that pause.
That's awesome. How can people get in touch with you? I will put your information in the show notes so people can access that.
Yes, my website is humandesignbydana.com. So pretty simple to remember. I have my offerings up and a little bit more about me. Yeah, that's the easiest way to get in touch with me.
Thank you for being on this episode. We had lots of fun. And for those listening, remember to find beauty every day and seek the magic in the mundane.